Interviews kinda suck. Stressful, anxiety-ridden, extremely difficult to get through. So let's talk about one.
Nice on!
Hello everybody, how are you doing today? I'm realizing now that I haven't ever started a video with the hello or how are you doing or pleasantries, so hi, I hope you're having a swell day today. But anyway, down to business. So this past week, on May 3rd, we got a Twitter post from Hopoo Games pertaining to an interview done by PC Invasion with Paul Morse, who was a co-founder of Hopoo Games. This interview actually happened like a couple of days before the Twitter post was made, but I don't keep up with like external game news, and this wasn't exactly the most promoted interview ever, so it just kind of slipped under my radar until now. In fact, I'm sure this probably isn't the only interview that has been done with Hopoo Games, and I'm sorry if there have been others in the past and I didn't cover them. But I happened to be on Twitter and I saw this interview and it seemed pretty important, so I thought I would break it down some and talk about what it entails for the game, because there was some pretty important stuff in there pertaining to the future of Risk of Rain 2 that I think deserves to be talked about. So let's get right into it. And also, you have a swell day. So, starting from the top, one of the first discussions is about the newest survivor added to Risk of Rain 2 from the original Risk of Rain, which was Bandit. When asked why they chose Bandit specifically, and more importantly, how they chose survivors in general, Paul responds with, "I think a lot of the reason we chose Bandit specifically was the fact that we could see his design and kit transferring really well from 2D to 3D. There were other survivors from the original Risk of Rain that had unique mechanics that can translate well, but we wanted to give Bandit a shot. Who knows about future updates, but more of these characters could come over in the future." So this is pretty interesting. The actual port itself isn't anything new, as Hopoo Games has done ports like this in the past with survivors like Acrid. However, the interesting part is that it seems like we've gotten some sort of confirmation that Hopoo Games chooses survivors that will make it in the game, and gauging from Paul's response, I think we can assume that they are choosing specific ones that will make it and not choosing others. This is something that I think we have all wanted clarification on. Which survivors are coming into Risk of Rain 2 from Risk of Rain? Will it be all of them or some of them, and if so, which ones and how many? From Paul's response, it seems like the answer is some, but not all, because he does finish with the "who knows, there could be more in the future" bit. That itself is not at all confirming anything, and he may have just said it to keep us aspiring for new ports from Risk of Rain, but I think he would probably just say they weren't porting anymore if they weren't. Like, there's no reason to get hopes up if they aren't following through, so I think it's safe to assume that we are getting some more survivor ports, or at least the option to vote for them like in the past, but not every survivor will be ported. So that's some pretty good resolution to that. I've been wondering about that myself for a while, and I discussed it some in my hopes for Risk of Rain 3 video, but I've not really seen any solid confirmation on it until now, so that's cool, and hopefully we can expect to see a couple new survivors from the OG Risk of Rain. Next, Paul talks a bit about the heretic character, the secret unlockable one, and her possible addition as a full playable character, and according to Paul, the heretic is confirmed as not happening, which isn't a big surprise by any means. I was not expecting them to make the heretic a playable character due to how much reworking she would need to not be OP, and how they wanted to be this fun, mysterious character you discover through gameplay and all that. It's nice though to have Paul himself say that the heretic is not being added as a base character, as it clears the air around speculation for that. So even though it's a little sad that we aren't getting the heretic added on, it makes sense and it's nice that we know for sure, and on the bright side, that gives them time to port Risk of Rain 1 characters. For sake of time, I'm not going to go into a discussion about everything that was said in the interview, so I'm going to skim over these next couple sections about the community and the moon level, as it's kinda straightforward stuff. Not that it's not important, it's just that it's stuff that I would expect to hear, and I can't break it down on any sort of deeper level. I have the interview linked in the description if you want to look more into it, but the gist of it is, first Paul talks about how much the community has done for the game and how tight the connection between the devs and the community is, which is pretty straightforward. Then they discuss Mithrix for a bit, nothing really new, just talking about his difficulty, and then they talk about the moon level and the additions made to it, as it was kinda barren previously, which is again pretty straightforward. I'm sorry for skimming over this stuff, and I have the link to the interview for you to read if you want to spend more time on it, but for sake of time, that's all I really have to say about those parts. But now into more interesting stuff. The next thing of note in the interview was when Paul was asked about the factors of the success of Risk of Rain 2, he stated that, "We design updates in a way that players are encouraged to take breaks and play other games so they don't feel pressured to be constantly checking in or waiting on the next big update. We want to make sure that if they are going to choose to play Risk of Rain 2 that they are excited and there is something worthy of spending their time on." And farther down he states that, "We don't feel the need to have smaller updates that won't make a meaningful impact on the moment-to-moment gameplay for players. I think saving all of the content up for when we feel it has a positive impact works really well for us as the developers and the community as well." So this is really interesting because it gives us some info about how updates are most likely going to work for the game as of now and the mentality behind it. So far, since its 1.0 release, Risk of Rain 2 has had a habit of doing larger spread out updates. The updates and patches for the game have been a kind of monthly-ish basis with some larger and smaller gaps here and there, and the anniversary update is the only real big full update that we've gotten since the game's release. So what Paul said seems to line up pretty well with that mindset. They will do larger and more spread out updates instead of the alternative smaller and more frequent updates. It's pretty cool to actually see his reasoning for the whole thing. We want people to play the game and then take a break for a while and do other things and then come back to the game and have a brand new update to explore upon their return. People who leave and come back to the game can be injected right in with a lot of new stuff, and the big updates can revamp hype for the game and draw in both returning and new players alike. Now, will everyone agree with that? Not really. There is the opposing argument that smaller updates that are more frequent are better because we the players are always getting something new to do, and it's risky to rely on surges of players and popularity instead of constant players. For those who play Risk of Rain 2 a lot, you know it's not super fun to have to wait like potential months for new content. Sure, it can be said that you can just play the game in those months between updates, but people are gonna eventually want some new content, as even Risk of Rain 2 can get a little boring after months of playing it with no changes. And since the updates are expected to come, it's easy to see how some people are probably gonna get frustrated at the wait time. Instead of drawing in and then siphoning out players with spread out updates, maybe it would be better to keep players invested in the game constantly with frequent updates. That way, new and returning players have more reason to stay once they start playing, and although a smaller amount of new players may join compared to the spread out update surges, when they are coupled with the amount of staying players and the smaller, more constant stream of new players, the amount of overall players is still high. It's dangerous to assume that Risk of Rain 2 players will always return with a big update, as they might only stay a little while to play through some of the update and then end up bored again, or just lose interest in the game altogether in the in-between time between updates. In addition to this, surges of new players is great, but a steady stream of new players from frequent updates has its advantages, as it gets new players to buy the game and keeps players invested in the game. So overall, smaller and frequent updates should provide a more stable player base than larger spread out updates in theory. The downside to this idea, however, is that there wouldn't be that big update that everyone gets excited about and spreads the news of. So like I said, there won't too often be a huge surge of new players with smaller updates. But for sacrificing that, you gain a more stable player base overall. But maybe Hopoo Games could get away with a compromise, like do smaller updates semi-frequently, maybe like bi-weekly, and then make a larger update every long once in a while to revamp hype. I don't know how easy that would be on an indie company, especially considering the size of Hopoo Games, but it's just a thought. Regardless, it looks like Hopoo Games is going on the larger spread out update path, so for those who are excited about that, there's some good news, and for those who aren't, I'm so sorry. And finally, PCI finishes the interview with a question about the upcoming paid DLC, and unfortunately, Paul responds with nothing very specific. He just states that, "We are in the process of working on the overall scope and scale of this DLC now, so there isn't anything we want to share just yet. However, we are really excited about the content we want to fit into this DLC and can't wait to share more details as we get further into the development." So that stinks that we don't get any specific news about that, but it makes sense as the DLC seems like something big that Hopoo Games would want to reveal themselves independently, as it's a pretty sizable deal, seeing as it's the first paid expansion to Risk of Rain 2, and we already generally know when it's coming and what will be in it, so I'm not really complaining. It's also possible that they genuinely don't have much of anything finalized for the DLC to announce, but I'm not too worried about that or the potential delaying of the DLC, as I'm pretty sure they do have some stuff ready and are just waiting to reveal it themselves. I mean, they announced the approximate release date and content of the DLC a pretty good long time ago, and I assume they would only announce it at that point if they were at least semi-sure that they would have it ready by the date they posted, which was Q4 of this year, by the way. So I guess we'll just have to stay tuned for any news on that in the future. So that about wraps things up. There's definitely more in the interview, and I have that linked in the description for you to read, or you can use the link in the Twitter post from Hopoo Games, but for sake of time, I just wanted to go a little more in-depth into some of the things that stood out to me. To be honest, I'm glad I found this interview at all, because I rarely follow PC Invasion or other companies like it, not because they're bad, I just never find the time to get around to checking up on the external gaming news. But enough about me, what about you? What do you think about this interview, and the original Risk of Rain survivor reports, and the updates, and all that? Be sure to discuss away in the comments, but civilly. And also, by the way, gotta mention, last thing, have a swell day.